I'm back with another story about my crazy mother who I called Light Switch, but I think I want to give her a different nickname. I decided on Bilzabitch, as she is a literal demon in human form. I heard someone say that on TikTok and thought it sounded better, so I'm gonna go with that. A quick update on my life. I'm still in the process of fixing up my apartment how I like it. My kids are doing well and I am officially divorced. I'm working a lot and bringing in some decent income. I'm also going to the gym 3 times a week while doing some home exercises on the other days and starting on the keto diet. I'm hoping to lose at least 40 pounds so I can squeeze into some cuter clothes. I've already lost a couple of pounds, so that's a win for me. Anyway, on to the story. This happened when I was in my early 20s. My mother's cousin Mary was getting married. She wanted me, Bilzabitch, my sister and a couple other female relatives to be in her wedding party. Bilzabitch hated the idea of being a bridesmaid. Whenever we would go do wedding planning stuff, she would complain the entire time. She hated the bridesmaid dresses, the hair and makeup ideas, and had a meltdown over the shoes. My sister, who was very much the carbon copy of Bilzabitch, would also throw fits. I didn't really like much of Mary's ideas either, but I went along with it because I wanted to support her. She was mostly wheelchair-bound and could only walk for a short amount of time before she got winded and had to sit down again. I can't lie. The bridesmaid dresses were pretty fucking ugly. A pale army green, short sleeves with a camouflage sash around the waist. They were cut just below the knee and the shoes were combat boots. Mary's husband, Hal, is military, so they were going with a military-style theme. Our hair to be done up in a donut bun on the back of the head, hair flat against the scalp, and the makeup had to be minimal. Despite the bridesmaids hating it, Mary loved it. That was all that mattered, but Bilzabitch wouldn't let it go. Her aunt, Tammy, had to rein her in on several occasions and remind her that this was Mary's day and not hers. I can't really blame Bilzabitch and my sister, Bilzabret, for hating the dress and shoes, but they should have just sucked it up like the rest of us. The lack of flowers was an even bigger problem. Instead of flower arrangements, Mary and Kyle went with black painted jars filled with sticks with a model tank sitting beside it as the centerpieces and dog tags as gifts to send home with the guests. Kyle has a huge collection of models that he put together and painted himself. It was his one hobby he enjoyed. On the sides of the aisle were fake rifles lining it with pale green paper streamers. It was ugly, but again, it was Kyle's and Mary's day, so what they wanted, they got. The day of the wedding, we were scheduled to get our hair and makeup done at a small salon a few blocks away from the American Legion where the wedding was taking place. My bun was so tight, I got a temporary brow lift and a headache. I noticed right away that Bilzabitch and Bilzabret were nowhere in sight. I called the house, trying to get a hold of them, but they didn't answer. It was already close to wedding time and we were all starting to get a bit panicky. Mary was looking lovely in her wedding gown, but she too noticed Bilzabitch and Bilzabret were missing and began to get upset. Finally, at less than 30 minutes until wedding time, they both rolled in and we all looked at them horrified. Bilzabret was wearing a bright neon pink dress, black high heels, big hair and bright, loud makeup. Bilzabitch was even more horrifying. He was wearing a pale grey dress. It was so pale that it could be mistaken for a wedding dress. She was drunk, clutching a cocktail in her hand and laughing to herself when she saw how upset Mary was. Mary began to cry, getting really upset. I do not advocate for violence, but this is one instance where I wanted to strangle her. I didn't need to, as Tammy woke up and had chosen violence that day. She grabbed Bilzabitch by her arm and forced her into a chair. She told her and Bilzabret that they both will change into the dresses Mary had paid for and get their hair and makeup done the way Mary wanted, and if they didn't, she would personally see to it that the two of them end up being dragged with the cans behind Kyle and Mary's car after the wedding, and prayed that they went onto a highway for the most painful experience of their lives. The rest of us sat in stunned silence, not wanting to get on that woman's bedside. Bilzabitch began to whine but relented after the threat of being smacked around by Tammy. We barely made it on time as it was less than a few minutes out from the time the wedding started. I walked with my escort down the aisle as the music began to play. Bilzabitch was so petulant about the whole thing that she was tugging on her escort's arm and acting belligerent. She was loudly commenting on the decor, calling it hideous and insulting people as she walked by them. The poor groomsman has my respect for enduring her behavior for the few minutes that he was escorting her down the aisle. She stood behind me and Bilzabret soon followed. Once all of us were lined up in our respective places, Carl walked down the aisle dressed in his formal military uniform. He looked so happy. That was until Beelzebub began to make comments about how stupid he was for marrying a cripple and being stuck with her. I snuck a look over at Tammy, who was fuming and looked like she wanted to punch Beelzebub in the face. She told her to shut the fuck up or else. Beelzebub's laughter and wily grin soon shifted into a sneer. I whispered back at her, begging her to cut it out. When Mary was coming down the aisle, her father was pushing her in her wheelchair. Beelzebub began to groan, grunting and sounding like she was in pain. I looked back at her and her face was as red as a tomato. I whispered, asking if she was okay, and she didn't say anything. I looked over at Timmy, who was glaring daggers at her and waiting for an excuse to knock her out. Once Mary got to the end of the aisle, her father helped her to stand and Kyle helped to hold her up so the priest could begin. As the priest was talking, I heard the most disgusting sound behind me. It was so loud that the priest lost focus and went silent. It was as if a bomb had exploded, and the smell that followed it began to fill the air. Beelzebub and the other bridesmaids behind her began shrieking. I turned around and looked at Beelzebub and then looked down. Her legs and the floor surrounding her was splattered with soupy, diarrhea shit. Mary was so horrified by the situation that she nearly collapsed and had to be helped into her wheelchair. Beelzebub was acting fake, pretending to be embarrassed, overly exaggerating even by shitting herself, and looked around and asked for some assistance in cleaning herself up. She looked at the groomsman who escorted her and in a sickeningly sweet voice asked if he would volunteer. He looked like he wanted the ceiling to cave in on him. She looked so satisfied with what she did that she was grinning ear to ear to see everyone causing a fuss over her, not a shred of remorse. Tammy was so fed up that she sucker punched Beelzebub square in the jaw and the two of them got into a brawl. Other guests had to break them up. The police were called and much to her real shock and humiliation, Beelzebub was escorted out. She tried to argue but Kyle told her he wanted her gone. Beelzebub and Beelzebub both looked at me as I was going too. Kyle insisted I stay. Some of us vomited from the smell because it was that bad. I like to think I have a strong stomach, but this was otherworldly. We all pitched in to clean up the mess. By the time we were done, Mary and Kyle were nowhere to be found. Tammy found them outside, Mary in tears and Kyle holding her. I apologized profusely for my mother's behavior. I offered to pay to have the rock professionally cleaned, as it had been a gift from a late colonel who had been a patron there some years ago. I know a simple steam clean would have gotten the job done just fine, but I wanted to show just how sorry I was for Beelzebub making the day all about herself and ruining such a precious thing. They said it wasn't necessary. Once the smell cleared out, we were able to continue the wedding. The reception was quiet and we all ate in silence. Once I got home that night, Beelzebub was giving me the silent treatment. I found her on the couch, drinking whiskey and glaring at the wall. A bridesmaid dress and boots were stuffed into the trash and the dress was shredded like it had been butchered with scissors. Beelzebub called me a bitch and said I was a traitor because I didn't support our mother. I told her that I can't support someone who would purposefully shit themselves just to take the spotlight off a bride on her wedding day. My brother, who wasn't at the wedding, broke my stereo by spiking it right onto the pavement outside. Tammy spread the news to everyone on that side of the family. Much of our family cut communication with her after that. She would get angry and embarrassed if anyone brought it up. She maintained for years that it was an accident, but anyone who was there and saw what happened knew she did it on purpose, out of spite and because she couldn't stand the day not being about her. She was never invited to any weddings in the family after that. Every time someone in the family announced their wedding online, she would whine about not getting an invite, but they would remind her of what she did and it being why she would not be invited to another wedding until she can learn how to act like a human being and not a wild animal and attention-seeking asshole. Spoiler alert, she never did. I still talk to Mary and Kyle now and again. They are doing well. Kyle is retired from active duty and serves as a drill sergeant. They aren't able to have kids of their own due to Mary's condition, but they are foster parents to 3 boys and a girl. Super happy for them and glad they are doing well. Anyway, that's it for that story. I'll be back with another soon.